Get home, Lindsay!
Test 1 2. Check 1 2. Check 1 2. 1 2. 1 2. Check 1 2. Check 1 2. 1 2.
How barely
You're getting something. I could be persuaded.
But I think it's
Test 1 2. Testing 1 2. 1 2. 1 2. 1 2. 1 2. Check 1 2. Check 1 2. Test 1 2. Check 1 2. Test 1 2. Test 1 2. Good afternoon. I still got just a little ring in there. I'll get that out in a minute. Check 1 2. Test 1 2. Test 1 2. Testing 1 2. 2 2 1 2. Check 1 2. Testing 1 2. Check 1 2. 2 1 2.
Mic check 1 2 3 4 5 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8 9 10 and whatever that happens to be. Check 1 2 3 4. Hello, test 1 2 test. It's a little better. That's a little better. Yes. Right. Okay. Right. But that one's yeah. That notch is pretty good right there. Check 1 2 3 4. Hello, test 1 1 1 1. Check 1, 2, 3, 4. Hello, test 1, 2. Test. Check 1. Hello, test 1, 2, 3, 4. Check 1, 2. Test, test, test. Check 1, 2. That one doesn't sound quite as loud as the others did, but I'm farther away from the speaker. Check 1, 2. Test. Check 1, 2. Check 1, 2. Test. Test 1, 2. Check 2, 3, 4. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Check 1, 2. Check. Check 1, 2. Test. Up. Check 1. Check 1, 2. Test. Check 1. Check 2. Check 3. Good sound person can't count past 2. Check 1, 2, 3, 4. Check 1, 2. Okay.
Check 1, 2. Test 1, 2. Check, check 1, 2. Check 1, 2. Test 1, 2. Test 1, 2. Test 1, 2. Test 1, 2. Test, test 1, 2. Check, check 1, 2. Test 1, 2. Check 1, 2. Check 1, 2. Check 1, 2. I had one of them out of order.
Oh, okay.
So you know
You're.
Oh, is that on?
There.
You know
Hot mic.
that you guys are going to do all the talking.
No.
Yeah, I'm instructed.
There's no way
Don't,
that'll-
Good afternoon, everyone. For those of you that I haven't had the pleasure to meet yet, my name is Alaire Ryan. I am the CBA president, and I'm so glad that everyone is here to join us this afternoon. This is a great turnout. The whole theory behind the CBA Deal or No Deal events was born out of a desire to get industry professionals together in a very casual setting where we could be candid with each other about what we do and why we do it, particularly with a focus on vet work and sales horses, be they weanlings, yearlings, 2-year-olds, racing prospects. This business is more than a job or more than an occupation for a lot of us. It's a way of life. It's our bread and butter, and anything that we can do to increase industry solidarity and, just sticking it together, I think, is a good thing. So I want everybody that's here today to use this as an opportunity to ask questions, get to know the panelists, the participants that are here today. I want to encourage those buyers that are here, when you're at a consignment, ask about the horses that we're representing, where they were raised, what they're like, what we think of them. We've put a lot of work to get to this stage in the sales season, and we're proud of what we have to offer. And, as far as I'm concerned, we're an open book. So, we welcome any and all discussion and encourage everybody to just, do this as a team. So, I'm going to go ahead and introduce our panelists that are here today. We have a great lineup. We'll be starting out with vets Dr. Bonin Clark and Dr. Mitz. Then we'll be speaking with buyers. We have Joe Pickerel, Randy Miles, and bonus participant Terry Finley of West Point Thoroughbreds. And we'll round out the panel with yearling managers or farm managers from a couple of Central Kentucky farms, Andy Howard of Lane's End and Logan Payne from TaylorMade. So while everybody's getting themselves settled, I have a couple of kind of housekeeping items to mention. On your tables, you'll see a sign-in sheet. If you wouldn't mind to just write your name and email down, that would be great. This way we not only get a head count for who's attended, but we could, maybe encourage some newcomers to join the CBA. So please take a moment to do that. You'll also notice going throughout the barn areas from various consignments, and if you're a vet in the repository, the CBA has come up with a pre-sale vet work notepad. These were created out of the effort to just streamline the pre-sale vet process in the barn areas, make the job easier on the vets that come to request horses, whether they're scoping or doing physicals or ultrasounding or taking additional views. We hope it makes the process smooth and easy for the vets that come into the barn areas, and also helps some of those smaller consignments or even larger ones standardize their process of how you greet a vet, how you engage with them, what information is good to ask for while they're inspecting one of your horses. So this is the first time we've tried this. They are meant to be a helpful tool, so please offer up your feedback after this sale, and if it's something that gains some traction, we'll plan on doing it again in Saratoga and again later in September. Lastly, if you are a current CBA board member, please stand up. And if you're already standing up, please wave your hand. This is meant to just show the audience that's here who is working on behalf of the CBA. If there is anything that you need that is sales related, or a way that we can help liaise with any of the sale companies, please let us know. We have several different committees and we work really hard behind the scenes to make it a positive sale experience for everybody that's involved. So thank you, directors. And with that, we will get to our first panel question.
Hello, I'm Carrie Brogdon with Mockmer Hall, and I would like to say that I will have to take credit for the open bar idea. Thank you very much for Fasig-Tipton. Fasig-Tipton was our sponsor for open bar. So my question is for Dr. Bonin-Clark. We all know, and we all consigners and breeders have had a plethora of horses. As Mark Toothaker will tell you, the Spendthrift Stallion barn is full of horses that may have been highly scrutinized by the vets. So here's my question to you. Back in your youth, you used to fail horses for what particular lesion that now you've learned through your vast years of experience that you're now more forgiving on, and you have learned through the process of evaluating them and their successes, be it at the 2-year-old sale and at the racetrack?
Are you saying I'm old?
Well, you are a techie, so JMU, tech, I figured we could joke around a little bit.
Okay. I would say that I have softened my stance on probably a significant number of things. Okay. How about upper knee joint spurs as an example? That would be something that I'm a lot more, okay, if the spur is set up, it's not actively lytic looking on the radiograph, if the horse doesn't stand like a Jersey cow back at the knee or really roll its knees. So I would say in the last few years, Carrie, not 30, I have softened my stance on spurs in the upper joint of the knee. Also, especially if there's an accessory carpal bone fragment in the back. Because if there's an accessory carpal bone fragment off the top of the back of the knee, that is an injury that happens when there's sucklings. And the body's response is to lay bone down in the front of the joint to try to stabilize that. So if there's a small accessory carpal bone fragment and concurrent spurring in the front of the knee, and the horse is reasonably well conformed, I let those go.
Thanks, Dr. Bonin-Clark. Dr. Mitz, I believe Sean has a question for you next.
Dr. Mitz, question for you would be, how do you quantify the risk to your clients when vetting a yearling to be resold at 2-year-old sales?
Price of purchase would be the biggest risk factor moving forward. So I've had plenty of horses that I've had plenty of negative implications about, and those have oftentimes been heard across the sales grounds and offered some excellent buying opportunities for some people along the way. And I think that's always great from a market standpoint to have people interested at all levels. But as far as certain things, if there's a surgical solution to x-rays, if it's a P1, then those probably don't affect the value. As hocks probably don't affect the value that much. With stifles, it depends probably on how large, how much real estate's involved. Some of those horses go on and do just fine. Small ones can be cleaned up, and there's been some good opportunities there. and many of you know, probably the bulk of my clients at this level will be those going to the 2-year-old sales. So it's not always what you guys are looking to do is to sell to the pinhookers at this point because they hope to move them up. But those are some of the risk factors that we look for that give us some opportunities. So I mean, we all get down to yes, no, maybes, and there's plenty of no's that have been excellent opportunities and have gone on and shown up in the afternoons and the weekends for these guys later, and have been good pinhook opportunities. But you know, I think extra pieces and knees, there's not many opportunities for us with those. With that said, I had watched a client buy one, do surgery on it as a yearling, and he turned a good profit on that horse too. So a lot of them change, and they're moving targets at this point. So we kind of have to be ready to try to determine what trajectory they're on physically. And if you have a horse in the July sale that's maybe a later foal, then you can maybe be a bit more forgiving on that horse too, because they've maybe they're not as set as some of the others would be. They're early foals. But I hope that answered your question there, Mr. Tugel.
Thank you, Dr. Mintz. I am actually going to ask a question on behalf of board member Conrad Vanderoff, who can't be here today. He's flying back from England. And this is for you, Randy. Randy, as someone who often buys to resell, will you kind of walk us through your risk assessment when it comes to buying yearlings? What, from your experience, have you become more accepting of, and what are perhaps some of your non-starters when it comes to having a yearling vetted?
Okay, well, I would have to say the first thing for me, not being a veterinarian, not being as smart as a veterinarian, I'm going to rely on my veterinarian. So myself, my partner and I. Because you're married to her? That would be the first thing. But regardless whether I'm married to her or not, because these guys are my vets too. So don't. We're on the AE. Yeah. So, but really, for us, we have to go to the vets, and I think Joe will tell you the same thing. The judgment calls. We do have 2 or 3 things that just we don't go for, and that would be problems in the middle joint of the knee, a 2B throat. But when I say 2B throat, that means we will really question a 2A, 2B throat, because I think we're really a little hard on the throats. And so we really dissect the throat and scope much more than a lot of people do. And then the third is just lucencies, articular lucencies, we just don't do. But sesamoids we've learned to live with a little bit more. When Bo and I first started worrying about the sesamoids, I would say up to 2 years ago, if it was sesamoiditis, we didn't even, and my wife would say, okay, you need to go and scan it. Took it off. And we learned that we weren't going to get a lot of horses bought because we were just being too stubborn. So as of last year was a big start for us because, and first I'll back up and say, we didn't, why is this thing on and off? All right, so 2 years ago, we would just walk away from, if Lisa would say, okay, we need to go scan it, we would say no. And being a pinhooker, the reason why we said no meant that if the 2-year-old buyer came to us, they were going to have to scan it. So we just said, that's too much work for the 2-year-old buyer. So we just walked away. Then as horses started becoming harder and harder to buy, we said we've got to be a little bit more lenient. And last year, we started scanning more horses. And believe it or not, most of the horses that we did scan, they passed. Now, granted, there were a lot of horses that they said, don't even go scan, but when we went to scan them, they did pass. So that's one area where we have kind of improved over the last 2 or 3 years. So we've gotten a little bit more lenient. So I think that, I guess I just answered all the questions. Yeah.
Yes. Thank you so much. Adrian is going to ask Joe next.
In this day and age, with the video scopes and everything now and the x-ray reports supplied at the sales, how much faith have you in both, and how many of the horses that you look at the reports at the barn would you go ahead and vet afterwards?
Great question, Adrian. Thanks everybody for coming, first of all. Thanks to Lara and everybody for putting this together, and Boyd and team for adding this beautiful addition to Fasig-Tipton. Once again, well done. So to answer your question, I think like anything else, change is difficult for us to accept in this game, and we're still scoping the horses that we buy. We are, a portion of them, I would say that. If there's any question at all, we will definitely go back and scope the horse ourselves. But a lot of times time comes into play if we have enough time to get back and scope the horse. But if the horse has a good scope on video, I think that we're faithful. We've got enough faith in it to follow up and just go with it. The reports, on the other hand, there's so much interpretation that's different from doctor to doctor that I feel like we've got to, I don't even really look at the reports at the barn because there's so much variance into what, we've got a lot of faith in our team of vets, and that's what we go by. And a lot of the things we're talking about on these reports, it's a matter of risk, and it's a matter of, kind of a word we're leaving out here is relationships. And you've got to trust the people you're buying from. Nobody wants to sell anybody a bad horse. Nobody wants to buy a bad horse from anybody. We've got to be able to train these things when we get them home. I feel like we need to do a better job at asking questions to consigners and asking questions to the people that have been around the horses more, because that's what it comes down to. There's a lot of things that come up on these sheets that they're really insignificant in the big scheme of things. To give you a little example, we broke about 100 babies this year. We've got 2 left on the farm. They both scope and x-ray perfect. That was not what slowed them down. It was just little baby stuff. So, we're getting a little bit too carried away with what this report says and what it really matters in the big scheme of things. And we got to trust the people that's going to get these horses. And if we can't trust the people that's getting to train these horses that can work through a couple little things, then we might need different people. So I think it's just kind of a learning curve. But to answer your question, video scopes I'm pretty okay with, but the reports, a lot of times we don't even really look at them. And I'd be okay with just eliminating them, because really the reports a lot of times are targeted more for selling horses out of the back ring for inexpensive. And what we get into sometimes is these reports that our doctor interpreted is a little bit different, and then when we come back and compare, you're talking about possibly getting horses returned and stuff, and I don't even really see the need for some of these reports in a lot of instances, especially horses that are selling for significant amounts of money.
Thank you, Joe. That was actually very candid. I appreciate that very much. So I am going to ask Terry Finley. West Point Thoroughbreds has been a buying force in the yearling, 2-year-old, and horses of racing age markets for many, many years. How have you adapted your pre-sale vetting processes over time, and does it differ based on the type of horse you're purchasing, whether it be a yearling, 2-year-old, or current racehorse with form?
So I think it is different, Carrie. You certainly, I heard the aspect of the value of the horse, and if we think a horse is going to bring 50,000, that dynamic and the analysis obviously is different than if I say we're at Saratoga and we have a feeling that the horse is going to bring $1 million. So yes, of course, but that's common sense. And I do feel for consigners. I feel for breeders. I really do, because I think about our kids, and our kids go to a game or they complete or compete on the soccer field or the football field, and there are a lot of kids that aren't good enough, and they go by the wayside. And I can understand. I haven't sold a lot of horses in my career, but I do. I see it. I see it in your body language, and I see it in your faces. You're trying to put out good products. And, I think buyers have to take that into a consideration. And the other thing is, if you do buy a lot of horses, right, the vast majority of them are not going to work out. And, for one reason or another, they're not going to be successful on the racetrack. So what we've done, and what I have to be very careful of, is to make sure I don't hold that against a consignor. If everything was on the up and up, and right, you can't hold grudges in this game when you're buying horses, because before it'll take you, I don't know, 2 or 3 years, and you won't have anybody to buy from. So it just depends. I think about the factors that go in, and I think a lot of the big buyers have teams, and one of the key components of that team is the veterinarian. And I think one thing I'd say to consigners, the vast majority of the veterinarians that are experienced on the racetrack and at the sales, right, they're just going to give you the amount of risk if there is an issue, right? They're not, I guess actually Randy and I were talking about this, about 15 to 20% of the horses that you vet are going to be absolute no's for whatever reason. And so the x-rays are going to be obvious. But outside of that 15 or 20%, right, what I want and what our team wants is a risk, a gauge of that risk. So then at the beginning of each day, right, we're able to rank order all those horses and to look at the risks or the risk coefficient, if you will, and to see where they line up and to see what we project them to bring in the ring. So I do understand, that if I were selling horses, I said, oh, they just turned away because of the vetting. And I'd suggest to you that a lot of times it's other factors. It's, I like a horse a little bit more, and he's a little bit later on in the sale, or he's the next day. So you see the multifactorial aspect of buying horses, and I'm sure everybody that sold horses, you also buy horses. So look, we're all in this together, and obviously we know that our industry is under some stress right now. And, I think the good buyers are, I think by and large, I think we're a little bit more flexible. And we're trying to buy horses. It was talked about before, right? We need inventory. I know I need inventory to put in front of people to syndicate. But I think over, especially over the last 10 years, I've probably become a little bit more lenient, where we're at a point right now where if I put a 2-year-old like in front of people, and I say we're not going to run to the fall because we have to take a chip out of an ankle, or we have to give this horse some time. You know, I think it's incumbent upon the people, especially now, when you see partnerships are so prevalent in the business, you know, we have to be able to tell our partners and our prospective partners about the issues, and to try to make it work that way. So, you know, I kind of threw a couple different things in there, but I hope everybody agrees, right? We're all in this together, from the breeders to the consigners to the sales companies to the racetracks to the veterinarians and to the buyers. And I think the more we look at each other and we're take into consideration all the different aspects that all of us face in our own segment of the market, the better we'll be.
That's a super point, Terry. Thank you so much. I'm going to pass this over to Rob.
This question is for Logan. Obviously, you raise a lot of foals and yearlings for market. How do you use the spring survey radiographs to alter the way you prepare a horse for the sale?
So, we probably have about 150 yearlings that we'll prep a year, and, 3 to 4% of them might have moderate sesamoiditis. We might back off a little bit, but overall, we were raised that the worst thing you ever did for a horse was build a barn for it. We don't like to bubble wrap them. We don't like to keep them in a stall. We like to raise them outside and be true race horses so that when they get to the sale, they'll have that maximum potential. And we've backed off a little bit here and there. We've gone from jogging in the walkers to just walking twice a week. Make sure those walkers are raked pristine after they're done walking. We'll do hand walking in the paddock 2 days a week, and then we'll walk over the PVC pipes 2 days a week to try and extend that stride. And then the 7th day, they get a day off, just like, hopefully the rest of us. But overall, basically, there's little changes. It's a lot different, like when my dad was doing my job. You see an OCD in a hock, that horse is toast, detrimental. But then the veterinarians learned that you could pop that OCD out and then run that horse and it would be totally fine. And it's kind of the same thing with ultrasound in these dispensaries today. We really don't know, this is all new to us, and we really don't know what's to look forward to it. But like I said back when my dad was doing it, they would run through those dispensaries because they weren't really looking into that kind of stuff. So it's all kind of new to us. But overall, we're really kind of just, it's what's best for the horse. Raise the horse to be tough. But also, if there's a lameness here and there, you got to look after it. You got to give them a few days off. That's all I got.
Sorry,
Andy, hey, I was hoping you could generally speak to how you guys sales prep a little bit, and then follow up on survey x-ray findings. Are there any lesions or sesamoiditis or anything, and like how often you track, if you find something, how often do you track it, and do you see it improving? If you see it improving, do you try to communicate that to some of your buyers later in the year, and how you approach those situations?
Yeah, so generally speaking, we prep horses very similar to what TaylorMade and Logan do. We alternate between walker and hand walking, and we give a day off. We do our spring surveys at 10 to 11 months of age. If we find anything, whether it's sesamoiditis, something in the knee, or something in the stifle, then we typically follow that up every 30 days, if not sooner. Anything sort of sesamoiditis-wise, if it's mild plus, if it's medial, we'll ultrasound. And then we typically follow that up with another ultrasound prior to sales prep. So, like what we were talking about earlier for the 2-year-old guys and guys that are going to resell, we have a really good idea of which way these things are heading. Whether it's sesamoiditis, if it's lucencies, cysts, things that you guys may be getting from your doctors and your vets that, this is mild to moderate risk, we have an idea of which way this is going. So it's if you guys would just kind of start coming up and talking to us, asking us if we like the horse, just general questions that you want to know. You know, the 2-year-old sales, you guys go down there and questions are asked. I mean, you spend weeks with these things. Come do the same thing with us, because that's the type of information that you're going to get from us. We're not babying these horses. When you baby them, the bones become porous, and then you become weaker. I mean, we're building strong horses that we want, you know, to go on and be a good product at the end of the day. So don't be afraid to come and ask. I think that answered your question.
Thank you to all of our panelists and our board members for their questions. Now we get to the fun part. At this stage, I'm going to open up the floor to Q&As. So I hope you guys have been thinking while we've been talking, and I don't want anybody to be shy. This is what we're here for, to be candid and learn. So I will open it up. I've seen quite a few vets attending. Thank you for being here. And I'm going to question you all, so please feel free to come forward, and I'll pass off the mic to you. But, you know, as consigners, you help us do our job to the best of our ability by letting us know who you represent or how a horse is for you when you come examine it in our barn area, for which we are extremely appreciative of. You know, we could not do what we do without your feedback. In turn, what feedback do you have for consigners or for sellers that we could help you do your job to the best of your ability? And it could be talk about the quality of the films that we put in the repository, or talk about the quality of video scopes. That's been a real learning curve for a lot of us, especially yearling consigners, since COVID. And I think it's one of those things that's here to stay, at least in our sale community. It hasn't been adopted yet, I don't think, by 2-year-old consigners so much. But give us some takeaways to go from here today as to how we can help you do your jobs to the best of your ability, whether it's making the process more efficient, giving you more information, etc. Dr. Burke, I'm sure you've got something to say.
Thanks, Alara. One thing that Terry said that I thought was particularly important was that we're all in this business together, and I feel like that at times, because of the competitive nature of our business, that we tend to be almost adversarial sometimes. And I would personally like to see a more collegial relationship between the veterinarians and the consigners. I feel like as a veterinarian, I'm a guest in a shed row. It's not my right to be there, it's my privilege. And I would like to see more of a cooperative spirit between the two groups. When I got my latest CBA email, I thought, well, you know, here's an opportunity for the CBA maybe to identify some pressure points for the industry and maybe get some of the veterinarians involved to just get into discussion and see how we might work on that together. With reference to the video scopes, you know, it's been an interesting few years because, as you probably all remember, the reason for that initiative initially was for horse welfare, horses and people. It wasn't necessarily designed to get rid of scoping at the sales, but it was designed to reduce risk for horses and people, and to reduce the number of scopings potentially if they were unnecessary. And you'd say, well, you know, this would be a good question for the veterinarians on the panel today, because I think we all have our own take on how well that's accepted. And my point wouldn't be to try to convince anybody that they need to rely more on video endoscopic exams, but to just say the intended purpose was to reduce it. And I think that you can do that when the videos are done well. And so I think one thing that I'd like to see is to have on a regular basis, right before all the sales, just as a reminder to circulate the protocol for what makes a good video for the sales. You know, there's some things about it that have to be there, or else I'm going to want to go scope the horse myself. If it's been done recently, which is very possible now, typically the horses ship in, they can have the video done here at the sale. So the time frame is acceptable. If the video is long enough and you get to see all the things that you'd like to see, the horse, you know, opening up its airway, swallowing a few times, get to look at all the structures, and the horse is identified properly, then there probably isn't any reason that you couldn't accept a video unless you had a client that was adamant. But again, it's not necessarily designed to eliminate scoping, just to reduce it to a significant degree. So that's just one example of some things I think we could be talking about as the two groups to work together to just problem solve some of the things that we're seeing.
Just curious if any of the other vets that are here have anything to add to that?
You have got to have something.
You're a fan favorite.
One thing I think Joe touched on was relationships in this business, and I think sometimes we get beat up a little bit because a horse didn't sell that we may have looked at, and I think you got to understand that, you know, one vet exam for one particular client isn't necessarily the same for the next client. All of our clients have different criteria as to what their risk tolerance is, and I think that's typically the way most of us present it to our clients is there may be a lesion here, it may impose some risk, who knows what the percentage is, but some are high, some are low, and I've got clients that are big risk takers, and I've got clients that are zero tolerance risk takers. And so sometimes if that horse doesn't sell or quote unquote pass the vet exam for me, that may be the reason, because that particular client has his own set of criteria.
That's a very good point. That's a very good point, and I think as consigners, we need to always keep that in mind. Be patient. We don't always know what somebody's criteria is when they're looking at our horses, so try to see the silver lining in it. If it doesn't pass for somebody, it might work for somebody else, and it's not necessarily the vet's fault. So, looks like Dr. High might have something to say.
So I think Dr. Berg pointed out, as far as the video scopes, the quality. That doesn't go for video scopes, that also goes for x-rays, and that's important for everybody. Sales companies, consigners, veterinarians, we should all hold ourselves to a level or a standard of being reputable, trustworthy, honest. That should stand for everybody. As far as those video scopes go, within a reasonable amount of time, I think is extremely important. Sometimes we'll see scopes 2 weeks earlier. A lot of things change. So 24, 48 hours, I think, are important with those video scopes. But as far as the video scopes and x-rays go, quality. And I think we all can hold ourselves to a higher standard with that.
Good point. Thanks a bunch. Anybody else? Come on, don't be shy.
I'm not a vet. I would have made a damn good one if I would have. So, sorry. One thing I was going to say is I think the vets and the consigners coming together around these video scopes has been a very positive thing, and I think it just shows when everybody works together. To me, that's been very positive. You have less horses getting scoped, you know, dozens of times, and all the things that can happen. You know, the ulcers or just whatever, people getting hurt, horses getting hurt. So I think that's been a good example of how we just can work together. And the other thing that I would just share for consigners and with vets is essentially from just an economic overview. If you look at it, there's a certain amount of dollars that are going to get spent on yearlings this year or 2-year-olds in a given year. And that money is probably going to be the same. Whether this horse fails the vet and that horse doesn't, the money being spent is going to be pretty close regardless. but how that money is distributed across the population of horses is what's going to shift. So, if I was a veterinarian, I think one thing that I would just share, because a lot of the owners are green, especially new people that might be end users, that they don't look for value. And, in the days that we're in now of these really large stallion books, there's good stallions that have, 100 yearlings going through the sale. And most of them are out of similar mares. There's not a real differentiator between mare quality. Most of them are pretty common. So these horses are by the same sire, out of the same mares. So what I see oftentimes is one vet's pristine, and it brings 5 times what you thought it was going to bring. So these two horses grew up together. They're out of the same similar type mares. They're both by the same stallion. They grew up. You think they're valued about the same. One goes over there, and it brings, $100 grand, and it's pretty disappointing. Nobody made any money. And the other one brings like 800. And really, there's only that much difference in the risk, right? I mean, if this horse has a little more pain tolerance or is a little more athletic or whatever. So I think the one thing that I would just encourage vets to do, we're all, as consigners, we're going to get the same amount of money when it's all said and done. This one might bring 800 and that one might bring 50,000. We're getting paid on both of them. So it doesn't, but if I was representing the buyers, I might take more of an approach of, hey, let's try to see what we can live with and maybe do a little bit more conversing with inexperienced owners to help them just grasp it of spots to pick where you might find some value. So I think that's something we can both do that just helps. In general, the more breeders who survive, the better off the industry is. And right now it's just frustrating because one guy has 5 yearlings and 3 of his don't vet. He has a horrible year and he wants to get out. And the other guy did fantastic and he's going to do the same thing over again. So just education, I guess the takeaway, that's a long statement, but just trying to educate our end users about what's going on and then help them articulate what their risk tolerance is more.
Thank you, Mark. Any other questions or comments from the crowd? Rob?
This is for our panelists who are purchasers. I thought Andy made a great point about asking questions of the people who raise the horses about vetting findings and how they're improving. I was interested to hear from Joe and Randy and Terry. Is that something that you would take into consideration as far as if a seller said, hey, this horse had a site elucency, it's improving every month, this is what's happening, we think it's going to get better. How do you take that information? Is it something you're willing to listen to, or is it something that you're going to be very skeptical of if it's coming from the seller?
I think it's very simple. In this game, any information is good information. Good, bad, indifferent, all of it's good. We would listen. We do it, Joe and I do it on our end. Sure, we want to hear what you have to say.
That's a great question. I think it depends on the person and the consignor and the relationship. That's probably at the forefront. But I also know that sellers are biased, right? I'm biased when I syndicate horses, and I know if I go to a consignor, especially at the 2-year-old sale, I have to ask. And I've been working on this the last couple of years. The questions are important, and I agree. Buyers and prospective buyers, I don't think we've done a good enough job overall to really ask those questions outside of, is this horse okay? Right? Because that is really not a question. That's too vague, and it's off into the air. So I think precise questions are important. But I do know that there are some consignors who go overboard, and you're trying to look at a horse, and they're in your ear. So, and they're giving you updates, and all those things you would think that we've already have. But I do know that there's a fine line. People. I would say though that when consignors they talk too much. In the viewing area, I don't think they do themselves a service. How about that?
Yeah, I agree. I agree with both Randy and Terry. There needs to be more communication between buyers and sellers. I'm lucky enough to be both buyer and seller, so I get to see both sides of it. And you know, part of it is these guys and gals purchasing these horses. You got to be confident in what you're doing. You know, when you find a horse that you feel strongly about, and the consignor's telling you the horse is okay, he may have a little issue here or there. Buy the horse. Don't regret not buying the horse. You know, when these horses are at the 8th pole and they're looked in the eye, I'm pretty sure they don't know what's on their vet report. They're either going to go on and win or they're going to back up. And those are the things that as agents and horse buyers, we need to be more confident in what we're doing instead of worrying about this guy firing me or this guy, if his horse is bad. Well, if the guy fires you for buying a bad horse that, like somebody said earlier, Terry, most of them just don't work out. You probably need a different guy you're buying horses for. So definitely relationships, trusting these guys and gals you're buying horses for. And if you've had luck in a spot at a particular consignor, which there's definitely some spots where we love to shop, and there's some spots where we haven't had luck. And those definitely go into this. But the intangibles I think are important in this game too. I mean, we're all here because we want to be here. There's a lot of people hiring right now. You know, we're all here because we love what we're doing, and we need to take some proactive steps to keep this thing going because, like Terry said, there's a lot of pressure, there's a lot of stress, there's a lot going against us right now. So everybody here, I mean, if we leave here and talk to what we're talking about tonight to one person and tell them to talk to one person, then I think everybody here will make a positive impact on what we're all trying to do.
Thank you so much, Joe. That reminds me of kind of a funny story. So when I was working for Select Sales in one of the late books, I had this filly, and we had tried everything. She was a stall walker. We had hooked her to the shank, and she broke all the shanks and there's nothing that could stop this filly as a stall walker. So I'm in the back ring with this filly. It was like a book 4, book 5 filly, and one of the major 2-year-old pinhookers comes up to me, and he's like, how's this filly vet? I'm like, she vets fine, but she's a stall walker. And he was like, oh, that's okay. I don't mind a little stall walking. And I'm like, okay, when he gets his horse home, he's going to call me, and he's going to be so pissed off. And he started to walk away, and I grabbed him, and I'm like, she's not a stall walker. She's a stall runner. I said, we put hay bales in the stall to try to get her to stop. And what did she do? Da-dung, 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 da-dung. So that is part of the relationship of what we have as a consignor that I basically had to pull him away, but I did not want him to buy a product that he was going to be unhappy with. And we hope to, that's the whole point of all this, is hope to start the dialogue and the relationship, and I know we all feel that way.
Anybody have anything they want to ask? No? Okay. Paul, I'll come to you first, and then Michael, you after.
Hello, my name is Paul Sharp, in case anybody doesn't know. I buy weanlings, sell yearlings with other people. We do a lot of pinhooking from yearling to 2-year-olds. The thing I run into, and this is a question for the vets mostly, and I'd like opinions from other consignors, is we run into the phrase, good enough for racing but not pinhooking. And I'd just like to know what everybody's take on that is. Because common sense tells me that the closer you get to racing, the less problem and issue that would be quote unquote good enough for racing and not pinhooking would be.
How long do I have?
It's all yours.
So there shouldn't be this double standard, right? We should all be trying to produce a horse that can perform athletically on the track. But that's not our reality. Our reality is we're here looking at an 18-month-old horse trying to predict whether or not it's going to be able to perform athletically as a 2-year-old on the racetrack. And also, I'm in the position of trying to predict what Nathan Mitz is going to say about this horse in 4 or 5 months. Shavanis, he's not here, but He's like a, back surgery that won't go away, right? So, but we're all in the repository listening to Mike give consigners, give 2-year-old buyers exactly what they want to hear. He's handicapping, okay, you're going to lose 3 out of 5 vets in the repository next spring. What did he just do? He identified a problem and then handicapped it, not for what he thinks necessarily is going to happen athletically, but what everybody else is going to say about it. So my answer to you, Paul, is you're right, but our reality is the 2-year-old pinhookers are held to a different standard. I don't know how to fix that. Am I answering your question? So I'm up here making fine statements, the obvious.
When you have an issue, and basically it rolls back around and you have the same issue, nothing worse, nothing better, and this horse is trained through it, and we lose buyers because of that. And that may go back to, the vets explaining to their clients what these problems are. But it's hard for me to go find a horse that I like, and he may have a little issue, and that doesn't resolve, but it's still, it's minor. But when it comes back around the second time, it becomes major, and that's the double standard we have. And I would love to resolve that, because I think we would find ourselves buying more horses with issues, and maybe have a little more success at selling as 2-year-olds.
Remember also, depending on the lesion we're talking about, just because you can go really fast for 1/8 or 1/4 of a mile doesn't mean you can go 5 or 6 furlongs. Like a suspensory branch to sesamoid desmopathy that we're all talking about and overanalyzing sesamoiditis. We're like, from one spectrum we blow it off 20 years ago, and now we hyperanalyze it, and the reality is it's a multifactorial problem. Somewhere in the middle is where we need to be, and we're in the learning curve of figuring that out. The papers on that issue, not to spend too much time up here, are recent. 2014 papers were published. 16, we're all waiting on McElroy's retrospective that isn't published yet. He did that in 16. 3,000 horses he looked at, 900 sets of films, ultrasounds, et cetera, and he took those horses to their 2019, they were 15 horses, so they took it to the end of their 4-year-old year, so it's 2019. That data is unpublished, so we don't know really about sesamoiditis and the, at least to their 4-year-old year, what kind of numbers there are. My point is, just because you can go fast for 1/8 or 1/4 of a mile, with another one is the base of the sesamoid issue. Basilar sesamoid injuries, XYZs. Great, you can go 1/4 of a mile. Can you go a mile? That's when everybody's seen the picture of the horse crossing the finish line with its fetlock on the ground. That's when the suspensory apparatus is really stressed, not at 1/8 of a mile.
I have a couple things. For the okay to pinhook, or not okay to pinhook and okay to race, I think with pinhooking, they need to have a lot of cyclical loading on these bones in a short amount of time. So we're in a time period where if we're hoping for something to improve, it may not, or it may need to improve when in fact they also need that cyclical loading. And that it doesn't work for us to give the horse 4 months off and then expect it to be fit and vet when we ask it to put in a sharp quarter and out a fit 3/8 time as well. So I think the demands of the 2-year-old market have become larger. They expect us to have a fitter product, and then the imaging's better now. We've come so far in the X-rays and the quality of the X-rays and video scopes at the yearling sales and as well as the 2-year-old sales. So with more information, you can be more critical. Sometimes some of these things, the pendulum's probably swung too far, but hopefully that'll correct. And then we also feel that it's a smaller market that we sell into the 2-year-old. So I think the yearling market you'll have you'll have a larger buying source here than you would at 2-year-olds. I don't see nearly the same number of faces there, as I do here. But I think it's those three things that make us more critical when we're looking to buy pinhooking prospects. And when I vet for a few of my racing clients, we know the pinhookers won't like that. And I may be looking at the same horse for different people, but it gets back to what Dr. Hay says. It's a different criteria. So, but we all know that, I guess, in Ocala. It just makes it frustrating. I mean, I think as long as I've been coming up here, I've heard that. What does that mean? And I kind of know, but it doesn't make it any easier to accept when you go to sell them.
I just want to be clear that I'm understanding. You just stated the pendulum has swung, and Greg said we're held to a double standard. That just, it seems totally backwards. I mean, I'm up here trying to buy horses, and we're scared to death to buy a horse that doesn't vet perfect. And I think, you know, we'll take a chance on something to just maybe very slight. But I think it's a whole perception that has been created by the veterinary community, to be perfectly honest. You say those horses, you know, they're working an eighth or a quarter, but, you know, they're not running 5/8 or working 3/4 or racing. But still, I don't think the attrition rate's any different. I mean, I don't have the numbers to back that up. But, you know, those horses go train at the racetrack every day, and then they race. And if you went to one racetrack and x-rayed every horse, you're not going to find perfect horses, and they're still running and doing well. But when you handcuff us from buying those kind of horses because we can't sell them later, I think that hurts our industry as far as, you know, people selling yearlings, selling weanlings, and so forth. And you know, and it's just totally at the opinion of the veterinarians and their clients, which I understand that because I'm a client too. I buy horses. But I know from my standpoint, and a lot of people that do what I do, you know, if we can't buy a horse with a little problem and not have confidence that we can sell that horse at the next stage with that same problem, it's going to move us on down out of somebody else's barn to another barn to try to find that perfect horse, and then we pay dearly for those horses. You know, I'm not saying there's an answer to it, but the perception, and like the study for sesamoiditis, which is everybody's eagerly waiting, but I know because I've participated in buying some race horses with a certain outfit. Some of these horses that we bought that were excellent horses had certain issues like that. And, you know, it's painted as black and white, but it's not black and white, if that makes any sense to you. All I'm trying to do is help sell horses on every level. And I think as we got into digital x-rays and everything, you know, as technology's come along, it's become harder to sell these horses as opposed to easier, which, yeah, it feels like a witch hunt sometimes, and that's a bad feeling.
Okay, so 30 minutes ago, Terry said, which is probably, none of the numbers are accurate, 15 to 20% are a no, or whatever the number is, and 80% are a discussion, or an attempt to put risk tolerance, right? Mark said, Taylor, 30 minutes ago, talked about the importance of education. And that's what we're all trying to do, is get smarter and make the right calls, make the right decisions. So I think very rarely that's not true. Sometimes I'm pretty black and white, but a lot of times I'm not. I would say 20% I'm black and 20% I'm white, and then 60 or 70% of the time I have a discussion with my client. And that discussion is about tolerance for risk, what their purpose is. Are they trying to buy a sprinter? Are they trying to buy a route horse? And what is the likelihood of any of these issues being a problem? So I understand why you're frustrated. I think education is really important, and very rarely when I find an issue, do I ixnay it completely. A lot of times I'll have a discussion with clients, and it's Dr. Hay talked about not exactly in these words, but it's pretty common for me to have 4 or 5 buyers on the same horse, and I failed it for 2 and passed it for 3. I gave them the same information. I said the same things. They had different levels of risk tolerance. But I'm still not answering your question. I'm not addressing the problem.
Until we have some good studies out there, there's so few good studies that as a group we can reflect back to. What McClellan's done has been really solid. But you know, some of these studies we've based all this information on are 30, 35 years old. We need some
Sesamoiditis was first talked about in 1959 by Rooney. We've been talking about this for 65 years.
We still don't seem to have it figured out very well. You know, it's every July we start it back up again.
So first of all, I think this is great that we're all being really open with each other and having these conversations. It's wonderful. Before I kind of been seen a little bit more on the sales scene, I was on the racing side of the business for 18 years, doing mainly training and assistant trainers and all that different stuff. So I think what everybody's touching on is risk tolerance. And training a racehorse at a racetrack is very different than training a horse on a farm. And if you're training a sprinter, you don't have to train them as hard. So you can live with certain things that you wouldn't live with when you have a route horse that you actually have to push on to keep them fit, to go the mile, mile and eighth, mile and a quarter. And I think a lot of it comes down to maybe a failure on our end, on the racing side, of communicating with what we're comfortable with. I mean, as somebody, it's not pretty training racehorses. And Joe, you know, probably prepping 2-year-olds, you might be able to say the same. You're constantly dealing with problems and issues. It's a constant headache. But you do know what you can live with, and you do know what you can work with. And a lot of it is just a chain of communication in the process of, you know, when this horse was a yearling, he kind of dealt with this. And when we had him as a 2-year-old, he kind of dealt with that. And the more ammunition you have of knowledge that you can work with, the better trainers can train horses on the racetrack to make them be successful. And our sphere, I don't train anymore, and I like not having the headaches, but the sphere has changed as a racehorse trainer. You know, there's certain horses where I'm looking at horse racing age at this sale, and I made my bread and butter when I trained off of capitalizing people's mistakes or things that they missed. But I look at horses now with current rules and say, I can't buy that horse because this horse won't pass the vet at the racetrack, or this trainer, it won't fit his program. And so the more information that gets passed down the chain to each individual, the more on our end as trainers or people in the racing environment giving you guys feedback on what can work for us, I think builds a system that's better for everybody, because you guys can prep horses in a certain way that might last a little bit more when they come to us. You know, there's certain horses you'll look at a 2-year-old sale and say, okay, I'll get this horse up to a half mile. And this is the biggest thing that sometimes owners don't understand that we have to explain to them. Horse looks good, 3/8. Looks great, half mile. 5/8, it's a slow horse. And it went from a good horse at a 2-year-old sale to something that can't catch a shadow. So there is a big difference, even with just that 1/8 of a mile difference. And then you get them to the races and see if they can handle the crowds and the gates and everything else. But the more we can get feedback, and I think, yes, we're talking about veterinary and we're talking about findings and different information on that end, but the biggest thing that helps us the most is mental attributes that these horses have and what can they withstand. Because you could have a horse with a chip and an ankle that's 100% sound, never has a lame day in its life. You have another one that will not run, will never race again. You run it once with the chip and it gives up on you. So all this information, and I think sometimes we're worried, and you know, if I tell you this, that this horse had this issue, it might not sell. But I think as people learn more on our end of what's tolerable in a racing environment, the more we can then provide that feedback and be more open to saying, hey, look, we can live with that. We'll pay for it. So if that's helpful to anything, I just figured I'd ramble on for a little bit. So anyways, thank you.
Anyhow, I don't need a mic. This is Boyd Browning, and I appreciate everybody coming to attend this. Appreciate everybody coming to attend this event today. And I guess I'm hearing about the collective effort and the collegial efforts and so forth. And the thing that frustrates me standing here today, we've got all these people in this area. We've got a multi-billion-dollar industry, and we talk about we've got 65 years since the last meaningful study was done on sesamoiditis. And we've got, basically, we're shooting into the dark, that the veterinary community doesn't really have a lot of scientific evidence of what matters and what doesn't matter. The consigners don't have a whole lot of information. The sales companies don't have a lot of information. And the buyers damn sure don't have a whole lot of information. So how do we collectively work together to do the research, identify the most significant issues or two, and as an industry say, all right, we're going to address this first. We're going to do a study. We're not going to, you said the study started in 2016, and we still don't have anything, and I'm not picking on anybody, but like, how do we solve the problem? How do we get together, say, here's what we're going to do. Our project that we're going to start on in 2022 is going to be X. And I'm not smart enough to know what X is, you all are. And we're going to, in the next 3 or 4 years, have a study, and we're going to try to publish some results that are going to be credible, that we can all rely upon. And then in 2023, we're going to start another project to say, this is the next thing we're going to start on. And 4 or 5 years down the road, or certainly 10 years down the road, we'll have a hell of a lot more knowledge than we've got today. We won't be all guessing and speculating. So how do we work together to start this process in a meaningful way that provides reliable information to everybody that we can all work together on?
You host these. You host this session. Boyd, I said that the first mention of sesamoiditis was in 1959. The 3 papers that were written are very recent, 14, 15, and 16 in the EVJ. And the big retrospective study that we're waiting for started in 16. So yes, we're frustrated waiting for that paper to come out, but there's been a lot of research done in recent years.
Boyd?
Okay.
I just wanted to fill in some of the spaces there. That study that was initiated in 2016 encompassed all of the horses that were sold at Keeneland September yearling sale in 2016. And there was a great subscription to that. Probably we got 75% of all of the horses, somewhere between 75 and 78% of all the horses were included in the study, meaning that their x-rays were read, and a great number of those also got ultrasound exams. Those horses were followed the next year through all of the 5 major 2-year-old and training sales. And the sole criteria was that they had to be in the Keeneland September sale in order to be followed. And then, as Greg mentioned, it was designed to go through the end of their 3-year-old racing season. The lead researcher, Dr. Francis Peat from New Zealand, got something like chronic fatigue syndrome, and the project got delayed. So it eventually ended up going through the end of their 4-year-old racing season. And it's been divided into 4 separate papers. So what you're going to see are the sesamoiditis paper and the stifle paper, because it's also looking at lesions in the medial femoral condyle of the stifle. And those 2 papers will be presented at the AAP this year, and they'll be in EVJ, so that information will be out soon. The ultrasound, 2 papers, the ultrasound papers will follow. I don't have an exact time on those, but it will be within months afterwards. So we'll have all of this. And just, per your comments about funding, you have no idea how difficult it was to get this funded. And Fasig-Tipton was one of the prominent funders, and we appreciated that tremendously. But it wasn't easy, and there was not what I would call a significant industry-wide response to the call for funding on this. So I think we need much more of this type of research, but it does cost a lot of money. This was over a $500,000 project.
Yeah, and I appreciate that very much, Jeff. And I think that maybe we've all learned something in the last 6 years that hey, these are important issues. As we talk about education, perhaps the heightened awareness of the men and women in this room and this building and throughout the industry, we can help prioritize some funding It doesn't, I mean, not that I'm scoffing at $500,000, don't get me wrong. But in terms of the size of the industry that we're talking about, it's not a significant investment for the long-term good of the industry. And there's lots of folks and there's lots of potential grants that maybe we can all work together and try to identify the next group of projects to start on in 2022 or 2023, so that 5 years from now we'll have a better understanding of what the next wave is. So I'm volunteering to help.
I don't know what we talk about after that note, because that was pretty powerful. Any other comments or questions from the group that I'm not seeing? Okay.
Hello, my name is Jesse Hopple. I pinhook horses, and I want to be the devil's advocate here for a second. So if we get all this information, and it becomes Greg, Nathan, whoever wants to bail in on this, becomes an exact science, haven't we lost horse racing? I mean, we like horse racing because it is not exact. It's got romance. It has uncertainty. But if all of a sudden we can identify these horses, the failures and the success, we're going to come here, the vets are going to give us our reports, and we're going to be down to half our horses. We're going to remove the gray area. I think, there's something to be said about those horses that play in the middle that can go either way. And if we do become an exact science, in a way, we've lost a little bit of the point of the sport. I mean, the uncertainty is what we're all here for. We like the risk. We like not knowing what's going to happen next. I don't know. Just a thought, just thinking of it from a different angle. I don't know if that came up to anybody thinking about it or not.
Yeah, I'm Frank Taylor, and I just wanted to comment on, how things have evolved. I'm 59 years old, and I was out showing horses at Keeneland when I was 8 and 9 years old, and back in those days, there was the same amount of horses that ran that didn't run. Some run, some don't run. And as technology has improved, and you've gotten scans, and you've got x-rays, you've got scopes, and you've got all this new information, that is hard to determine what's gonna affect a horse. So this technology is a blessing, but it's also a curse. And then what it's done is, back in those days, we just raised those horses and did the best thing for those horses every day, kept them on a regular turnout, and didn't do anything to interrupt their schedule. And bottom line, my dad always said the worst thing a man ever did for a horse was build a barn. And how many horses do you have colic that are out 24 hours a day? You know what I'm saying? These horses that are outside, the only time we ever x-rayed a horse was when he was lame or he had a boggy hock or boggy ankle or something like that. And now today we're x-raying everything and we're checking everything, and then we're saying, oh, well, look, this chip's probably not going to bother this horse, but let's go ahead and take it out because he's going to look good at the sale. And then I lock him up in the stall and I take the chip out and he kicks the wall and fractures the coffin bone, or he gets out there and you turn him out and his bone's gotten soft and now he develops something else. And so what we've started doing is we've started raising horses, or we're trying to raise horses to fit x-rays and scans and scopes rather than trying to raise a runner. And I think that's very detrimental to everybody. And there's a cost to doing business like this because you've got to pay a lot of expenses to do all these extra surgeries. You got to do all these x-rays. I got to x-ray them in March. I got to x-ray them before the sale. I've got to scope them. I got to do all this stuff that I don't normally have to do. And so it's a huge tax to the breeder. I feel sorry for these breeders. It's hard for me to talk to a guy and say, hey, get into breeding business. And a big part of it is because we have all this scrutiny that we have to go through to try to get these horses raised. And, I think I have a big thing. They always want to lock one up because he's got a cracked rib. Well, you lock him up for 2 or 3 weeks, and then next thing you know, he's got OCDs, this, that. I mean, we just mess with these horses too much. And if you keep them on a good schedule, turnout, and don't screw with them too much, and treat the problems when they arise, you're going to raise a lot better product. And at the end of the day, It's gonna cost less to produce that product, and you're gonna have a better product at the end of the day. So I don't know the solution to that, but that's what my thoughts are.
Jesse, I just wanted to respond to your comment about injecting too much science into this. I don't think we're in any danger there because all of these research projects that get done that refine our understanding of these diseases of bones or ligaments, tendons, whatever it is, they give us a better ability to put it into a risk category. And even on this new sesamoiditis study that's going to come out, it's not going to say either sesamoiditis is inconsequential and don't worry about it, and it's not going to say, oh, it's the most horrible thing on earth, don't touch those horses. It's going to basically say, okay, we can more narrowly define the level of risk here, and compared to the general population, you're going to get a certain percentage of horses within the moderate sesamoiditis category that are going to be affected at some point. But the truth of the matter is when we're vetting horses and you give us a short list and there's a horse on the short list to be talked about, neither I nor any other veterinarian here can read the future and tell you what's going to happen with that horse. We can tell you in general terms what the risk level is, and if you had 10 of these, approximately how many would be okay and how many wouldn't. But we can never say on any one given horse what's going to happen to that horse. And so I think you're safe there because if I said 9 out of 10 of these things don't work out, which I don't even know anything that's that bad, but if I said that, that also means that 1 out of 10 would be okay. So to your point, horses can surprise you, and I think that a veterinarian with good communication skills would be able to talk to their client and match it up with that client's risk level. And so if you had a high-risk individual that you were working for, that's the greatest thing in the world because you can really do some good for them.
So one other thought I have is, I don't know how you could do this, but if you could get a group of veterinarians that at each sale, it was funded for them to grade those horses and list their lesions and grade those horses on the risk level of these lesions would cause, right? And you did that, let's just say, on every yearling, if we could fund that. And then you know how when that horse runs and it has a work nick rating and it's an A+, well, we have a vet x-ray rating on the horse had this kind of x-ray rating or he had this kind of scope rating, right? And then you go through there and we'll just see how many grade 1s, scope and x-ray and A, and how those horses perform. And then we could really track and we could educate ourselves. And I think what that would do is it would be the best education in the world for the buyer. Because when he showed up to the sale and he's been reading the TDN the last 3 weeks and there's been 5 grade 1s when they all had C's and B's and D's x-rays, you say, you know what, maybe I ought to buy one of those, it's got an issue. So it's easy to identify problems, but to solve a problem is difficult. But I believe that could be a potential way. Now, I'm sure there's going to be things, well, you got legal issues, you got this or that. But if we could just come up with a simple grading system and elect each year vote on a group of veterinarians that are really veterinarians that know what they're doing. They've been at the track, they've done this, they've done that, they've experienced, they've treated horses on the track, and have them give a solid grade on that horse, a simple grading system. And then when you get, you'll learn a bunch in 2 or 3 TDNs. You'll start learning like crazy every day. So just a thought and a suggestion.
I'm going to try not to, yell. We had a question on this side of the room. either as a buyer looking at a report at a consignment or possibly a vet looking in the repository, what is the effect or your outlook if there's a surgery letter but the horse is vetting clean?
I'll quickly interject before I give it to some of these buyers, but I would say the biggest risk factor, which we've all kind of touched on today, was an unquantified amount of stall confinement for these horses. And we've had plenty of horses that vetted perfect that had this, that, and the other, and you could piece that all together, and you knew this horse was in the stall for 4 to 8 weeks, maybe 3 times throughout its life, and we've got it, and it's only 18 months old, and this thing's got a high suspensory in November because it wasn't prepared for what my clients were going to do, which was simply just break it. And we haven't really put any of the mileage on it at that point. So I think, so it gets back to, we've got to be cautious on how much we intervene with these horses along the way, because probably soft tissue development is so critical, and that occurs from the time you wean them until now. And if they've been hothoused, they're not going to be ready for Ocala. And so they do tend to need more time. But it makes it easy to buy the horse, but too many of those have been the wrong horse for us.
So comment about the surgery letters. I feel like something that was not brought up already, and that's a great point, is there has to be a certain level of horsemanship. Say a horse had a surgery in a hind ankle in January or whatever. You know, we got to be able to look at these horses and see what's the ankle look like today. Like, we got to use a little bit of horsemanship. These vets, we need them and they need us. They're one tool in our box that we feel like, and I feel like sometimes we rely too much on them, but a lot of this horsemanship has gone away. We need to be able to look at this horse and say, how's he moving now? How's the joint look? And how am I going to be able to, how's it going to be when I get this horse home and do what I need to do with it? So a lot of it has to do with the program you're going into. There's certain things and certain horses that you don't want to send to certain people, because nobody wants to get a horse back from the racetrack 3 times before their first start. And some trainers, it's not going to, if everything's not just perfect, they're not going to kick on with the horse. So we need to have in mind what we're buying for at the end user level for which particular trainer, and have to have a pretty good understanding of what they're going to want and what they're going to be acceptable of. But as far as the surgeries go, we got to use some horsemanship in this too. And you can read x-rays all day, but what the horse looks like on the end of the shank and how the horse moves is as or more important than what the films say.
So I was just thinking, this was the first time I've been involved in this. It's been a very enjoyable afternoon, so I appreciate everybody taking the time. I was thinking about our currency in the industry, right? And really, there are only 2 things that we all trade, right? And those 2 things are hopes and dreams. Does anybody disagree with that? Like, that's our currency. So let me tell you why I bring it up. HISA is obviously the bill that passed at the end of 2020. And I know it really doesn't pertain to the breeding industry, right? But I will tell you that I've seen a significant positive impact from the legislation that's passed. And I know it's gotten off to a rocky start, but I do think it's our only hope to hit the reset button in our industry, right? Because the old way, I think a lot of us knew it couldn't work. There was no way it could work with 38 different states. So let me tell you that people that we need to get in the business, because if we get more owners into the business, a good number of our problems are either lessened or they go away. So I would just ask, I ask breeders and consigners to learn about HISA and to realize it's there to help us and and to address the people that were doing things to make our playing field unlevel. And I can tell you that the significant players that really help our business, the Larry Bests, the Vinny Violas, the Mike Rapoli, you go right down the line, like they don't want to be snookered. And so if we as an industry do a better job and we support HISA, right? That's our shining star in a lot of respects. And of course, I've seen pockets in the industry that haven't supported it at all, which I don't think those organizations are doing a service to their members, right? But you see where I'm going here. Like, this is our North Star that we can all get behind. And I don't like government regulation and increased costs and all that, but I will tell you that the people that I talk to that are prospective partners or clients or big players in the industry, a couple guys from Silicon Valley, they're getting the word that we're doing a better job in integrity and other parts of our business, that we're trying our best to get our house in order. And I'll suggest to you, they don't want perfection because they know things don't change overnight. But I do think that, especially the breeders and the sellers should learn more about the legislation and the law. And I think it's going to help us. I do. I hope we all do, that in, 10 or 15 years, we all look back and we saw that we had a reset and it was very positive and it took time, but it leveled the playing field in several different segments of our industry. So I just say, I see a lot of hope, especially, you think about it, it's the horse racing integrity and safety. So you're talking about the safety, that encompasses a lot of different things. So I think we have the structure or the perspective structure to do great things and to make this business into the future really, really stronger and a lot better. And we attract owners and sales are vibrant and we're breeding more horses. And all of a sudden you don't have 4 horses in a grade 1 or a grade 2, right? Because we know, I think from an owner standpoint, it's advantageous, right? But I know, and other owners know, it's not advantageous to the business as a whole. So I'll step off my soapbox, but I think this really does give our business a shot where I do think a lot of us, before that was signed into law, I think a lot of us were really questioning, do we have a future in our business? And I think we do now.
It's about time for us to start wrapping up. Once again, I want to thank our awesome panelists for giving us so many good takeaway points for the evening. Boyd, you're wonderful as well. Thank you for hosting us. Hammond Communications, Thad, you've been a great help. Thanks to everyone for attending. And again, the CBA is your seat at the table, so please, if you have anything on your mind, stop me, stop Carrie, stop Rob, Walker, Lynn, Gray. We're all here, and we're here to put our best foot forward. So, thank you again.